We're back, baby! It's been over a year since our last homebrew episode, but after some classic hiccups, we've got an incredible IPA/IPL/IPK coming at you that's crisp and clean, but loaded with juicy and citric aroma, and it's all courtesy of this week's sponsor, WHC Lab. So this story began a couple of weeks ago when our amazing friends and podcast sponsors, the Malt Miller, introduced us to the folks at WHC Lab. Now, the Malt Miller said that these guys had two really interesting, incredible new strains that had just come out. One was a kind of juicy New England yeast, fairly standard on the face of it, and another one was a super clean West Coast yeast. But what made these yeasts really special is that they are thermotolerant. So essentially that means that you could ferment them really warm and they'd still perform really well, or in fact you can ferment them at any temperature and they should still do exactly what you want them to do. Now that has a lot of implications for brewers. It means quicker fermentations, less cooling, potentially bigger flavours, but it also has big implications for homebrewers as well. Most notably, it means we have to worry less about temperature control, which is one of the biggest issues we have as homebrewers on a budget. But the thing that really caught my attention was that this high voltage yeast, the clean West Coast one, WHC said you could use it to create lager-like beers in record time. Now, as a homebrewer, that's the kind of thing I'm really looking for. I love super hoppy beer, but I also want that hoppy beer to be presented really clean, really crushable, really drinkable, so that I get through the 20 litres I'm brewing every time. So with my interest peaked, I reached out to Phil, Technical Director at WHC, to find out more. So Phil, thanks for joining me. I guess the first question would have to be, I mean, this sounds like an incredible kind of mad yeast. What was the idea behind it and what have you brought to market, I guess?
So like when we were looking at developing these strains, we were talking to people and it was like, like say like really IPA forward breweries. And then they said that, like they have a tap room, say, and I was asking them how they're buying their New England yeast off of, say, and in the tap room, they have a lager on tap. And I was asking them, they were like, oh, we actually buy that from another brewery, which I thought was a little bit strange that all their lager that they bought from the tap room was from another brewery. So it's kind of like saying, why? And they were saying, look, our tanks are always filled. We run the IPA. I can't have a lager in tank for, 8 to 12 weeks. It just wouldn't make any sense from us. So we just buy it in. So we kind of said it to them, well, what about if we develop something for you that you could bring down that towards more normal ale fermentation? They were like, yeah, definitely. But the only problem is it won't taste like a lager. So like we developed some strains, we went back to them, we did like a blind tasting test and they thought it was lager, lager made with lager yeast. But we were like, well, we actually made that in a week and we fermented it at 28, 30 degrees and no.
So this yeast is super capable of like making a West Coast IPA, very quickly and fermenting it, I guess, like 30 or warmer. What are we going to do to make it capable of producing something even cleaner and really letting the malt sing as well as the hops in a beer?
I think for like clean ale styles, you could probably look at fermentation in the 30s, so like 30 to 35 degrees, and that would be when the yeast would ferment at the the highest pace. But then we've had people that are trying to look for more lager style. They are generally doing fermentations in maybe 24, 25, 23 kind of range. It's still pretty quick, not as quick as the 30s. So you can kind of manipulate the temperature depending on the style of beer that you're doing. So the idea is to have a strain that's a little bit flexible that you can kind of use in what scenario you want, because every brewery is different, every recipe is different, right?
So it's got almost like a 10 degree or even more kind of range in which you can get either lager-like cleanliness or sort of West Coasty.
Yeah, well, actually 17 degrees, because we've had people use it at 18 degrees all the way up to 35 degrees. And to be honest with you, you could probably run it a little bit hotter than 35
And in terms of any kind of cold conditioning with those people that you've worked with who are making sort of lager styles, are they cold conditioning, and roughly how long are they seeing as best?
Generally, we're finding that people are getting it from grain to glass, keg, whatever. We're finding that they're basically getting the production done in about 2 weeks.
Sort of looking at potentially producing a 5.5, 6.5% IPL in four days ferment, 2 days of dry hop, and then maybe a week of conditioning. So
yeah,
incredible. So that was me convinced. All I had to do was convince Brad, who is, like me, a bit of a lager purist, but also knows my views on where IPL stand in the IPA canon. So I thought the best thing to do was to get my favourite IPL and confront the issue head on. So a couple of weeks ago, I was caught on camera / making a statement direct to it. The IPLs are basically irrelevant these days. And to me, an IPL's kind of lost its relevance because, or never really had relevance, because USO5, WLP001, like these classic West Coast yeasts, are so clean anyway that an IPL is a small difference.
Oof.
Which kind of leaves IPL, which is supposed to be this incredibly crisp, almost more IPA than IPA, because there's nothing in the way of the hops. Kind of leaves it a little bit, well, irrelevant, Bradley.
Oh my God, Jonny. I'm not having it, mate. I think IPLs are relevant. India Pale Lagers, mate. It's like the best of lager meets the best of an IPA.
So how do we, I guess, tell the story, both in terms of in this video and in terms of, because beers should have stories, but also in terms of the flavour, how do we make this beer scream, I'm not an IPA, I'm an IPL?
Crushability.
Crushability. Cleanliness.
Cleanliness, yeah.
Hop. Really dialed in hop aroma, nothing really distracting from it. And I think probably dropping the ABV a little bit. So it's not going to be like a 7% IPA.
Yeah.
It's not going to be like a session IPA. It's going to be like 5.5-ish, I'm thinking.
I like that. I drink those all day long, mate.
Well, basically what we've been describing is this beer here.
Yeah, right.
So why don't we have a taste, do a bit of reverse engineering, see what we can learn and see what we can make ourselves.
Love it.
So this comes from Lost and Grounded, from the mind of Alex Troncoso, one of my favourite brewers in the UK. He's the inventor of IHL, which was one of my absolute favourite beers back in, about 2014-ish?
Yeah.
So this beer's had a lot of different guises, but it is essentially a 5.5%, or 5.2% India Pale Lager. There's a bit of haze to it, isn't there, actually?
There is a little bit. Nice glass, that, Jonny.
It's also the way that Alex always makes his beer. I mean, Keller Pils is like an unfiltered lager. It has a bit of haze. Not all of it drops out during the lagering process either.
Yeah.
Let's see what the aroma's like on this. I mean, it smells like an IPA, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Lovely, juicy fruit, mango. I'm going to say mosaics in there.
Mosaic. Right,
Something a bit more old
a
school.
little bit of funk.
Chinooky, centennially.
Sea hops, yep.
Like it's got sort of, maybe not Chinook, but it's got some West Coast pine and, not resin, pine. Fresh, herbal.
Yeah.
Forest in California vibes.
Yeah. There's a little bit of lemony freshness to me as well.
Yeah,
a little tinge.
To me spoke Centennial. When you put Centennial with bigger hops, it sort of presents as like this lovely, smooth, candied lemon kind of thing. So we've got a mix of like new, juicier hops and old school West Coasty. What about malt? Are you getting any kind of honey, biscuit, sweetness?
I think there's a slight sort of breadiness going on for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's probably not just, I mean, Pilsner malt would be the obvious thing. It's a lager. It's probably not just Pilsner malt. There's probably Carrer or something. Munich would make a lot of sense as a lager. So there is a little bit of structure to that malt bill. Absolutely no yeast character, no stone fruit, no like with particularly with USO5, I often get like a slightly stale vanilla-y kind of thing, a little bit of sweetness that comes from the yeast.
Yeah, there's none of that.
No. In fact, if anything, maybe the tiniest hint of sulphur, a little bit of lager actual yeast character. But it's well hidden by all the hops. Let's give it a taste.
Cheers.
I mean, that's definitely lager vibes, isn't it?
crushable, mate.
Jacob's Cracker malt.
Yeah.
Tiny little bit of, like the mildest bit of stickiness from something else in there. And then it's all lovely, soft, juicy character and like piney bitterness.
And it doesn't linger. It's like crisp, like a lager.
Yeah, not
be,
robustly bitter,
No.
just clean and bitter, like you get from noble hops and from a lager snap.
Yeah,
so it's it's gone.
Yeah, it's great.
So we've got to achieve that, which is going to be, from a technical point of view, both recipe and process, very difficult. Well, that's why we've chosen this yeast with WHC, because basically it's thermotolerant, which means that it will ferment at anything between like 18 and 40.
40?
But it will come out really clean. So that actually means that we can ferment it really fast. We can ferment this at like over 30.
Wow. Bonkers.
Yeah, instead of like the 8 to 12 that you need with a lager.
Yeah.
But we can then still lager it afterwards, give it a little lagering phase to make sure it's clean and make sure it's clear.
So the lagering phase can be a lot shorter, and the fermenting stage is a lot shorter as well.
Yeah, so I mean, lager, it's slow and it can kick out lots of different things. So like, the law of thermodynamics means everything happens slower, right? We haven't got that. It's going to ferment, clean itself up faster, and then we give it that lagering phase to mature.
So this is magic. This is game-changing sort of stuff.
So not only are we going to make an IPA that is a lager and a lager that tastes like an IPA, we're also going to make that lager in 10 to 14 days.
Wow.
But the thing I should say to the pedants out there is this this is not a lager yeast.
Okay, so
this
where
is
it ferments.
an ale yeast that we're going to lager. So in some ways, we're inventing a new style, Bradley.
Yeah.
The IPK.
So it's a Kolsch.
It's an India Pale Kolsch. Now, if we were going to go to an expert to tell us how to brew a brilliant IPL, who do you think we should go to?
I'm having trouble thinking.
Well, think no more, because I have lined up an interview with the one and only Alex Troncoso of Lost and Grounded, and he has agreed to take on this mad IPK project with us. Let's have a chat with him. So Brad's on board, and I've turned what we discussed over a tasty Running with Scepters into a caramel-tinged, super hoppy and really crisp beer. So my plans for a really light, lager-like kind of base, mostly Pilsner with a little bit of Munich for a bready kind of caramelly edge, some Carapils for head retention. We're going to have Magnum as our bittering hop for a really nice clean bitterness, but also put a bit of Mosaic in there to get some sticky resin and pine out of that. And then the dry hop is going to be massive with loads more Mosaic for that juicy fruit, chewing gum kind of character. Nectaron for a little bit more stone fruit, nectarines obviously. And then my personal favourite hop at the moment, Motueka, for a kind of lemon, lime, almost coconutty thing to cut right through. So Alex is one of the most influential brewers in the UK and probably beyond. He started his career in Australia at Little Creatures, and then he moved to Europe where he toured around the continent learning about continental brewing and indeed drinking, I'd imagine. He ended up in London where he became head brewer of Camden Town Brewery at its absolute peak when they were knocking out some of the best lagers in the country. And then he moved to Bristol to set up his own brewery, Lost and Grounded, which I personally think is one of the best lager breweries on the continent and has won so many awards that would back that up. So as always with these homebrew episodes, I was pretty nervous to be presenting my own recipe to him. So Alex, thank you so much for joining us on this madcap scheme.
No worries. Looking forward to tasting this creation
and maybe getting people excited about IPL at some point.
Know. Yeah.
So we had our first IPL together. I don't think it was the first time we met, but it was early on, and we've looked this up. October 2014.
Yeah,
you and I met at Camden Town Brewery at I think it was about 7:30 in the morning, because that was the only time we were both free.
Yeah.
We drank IHL, which was in India Hell's Lager. Is that what it's?
Yeah. So I didn't really know much about it, and it was actually like that project was probably like quite a collaboration between a few of us. So it's like one of our brewers, Pete, was first like, "Oh, I had this beer in America, and it was like this," and he kind of pitched this idea to this big, massive, kind of chewy, sort of, I guess, West Coast IPA-ish version of a lager, and then I was kind of like, that sounds pretty cool, but let's kind of lighten it up a little bit because we don't want it to be too heavy and chewy, and maybe reduce the ABV a bit because I think we were initially talking 6.8. We put it down to 6.2. And then one of our other brewers, Brent, he was actually like, we should think about the dry hop, and he actually suggested like we do double dry hops. We do dry hop once at like slightly warmer, and then once at like kind of during maturation. And so we kind of like had this amalgamation of kind of different ideas that came together, and then produced this like really amazing, just amazing kind of lager.
When you talk about the concept of IPLs, it sounds like the perfect beer, like a very kind of crushable, clean beer that gives all the focus to the hops.
Yeah.
And yet it never quite took off.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is like kind of consumer led. It's like even though we kind of talk about just like inventing beers and everything, things still need to broadly fit into a category, So it will be quite interesting to see how this concoction comes out that you're
Concoction's probably the right word for it, yeah. So from what we've talked about, it sounds like sort of for you and I think for me as well, like an IPL, has that IPA kind of hop character and big aroma. It has a kind of Pilsner base, but it does have some kind of West Coast inspired malt depth to it. Just not huge color and not huge chewiness. It's just adding, I guess, almost joining up the juicy kind of character from the hops with the plain base and just making it connect. That was sort of where I was trying to head with it. And I was trying to keep at least the very idea of like a pure lager recipe in there by using Munich rather than say like a caramel or something like that. I've gone, mostly sort of a Pilsner malt and then a Munich, about 5% Munich.
Yeah, I think that'll just give like just enough character and give it like just a little bit more color. So you don't want too much, but that'll just make it. I mean, it's still not going to be very dark. I don't think it'll be like probably
just a golden hue is what I'm kind of hoping for.
Yeah.
When you hold it up to the light. Yeah. The hops. So I've put Mosaic in there out of my love of IHL and of running with Scepters. And then I thought Motueka being the daughter of SARS and having a kind of lemon and lime kind of character would be a nice link.
Yeah.
And then Nectaron. Have you brewed with Nectaron?
No. It sounds amazing, man.
Yeah, I mean the profile of it also reminded me of running with Scepters is running with Scepters aroma.
Yeah.
That kind of peachy but also orange rindy kind of stuff that it's got. Just I think could really work with a ever so slightly golden base.
I mean, that sounds really, really nice to me. Like that blend you're talking about there. I think it's
cool.
I think it's about probably just having enough of everything and just not going too ape with it,
Yeah, so that was a question I need to ask. So with IPAs, like West Coast IPAs, I typically go somewhere between like 7 and 11 grams per liter in a dry hop. Is that going to overbalance an IPL?
I mean, we're quite conservative. So I mean, running with Scepters is probably only about 4 to 5 grams per liter, I think. It kind of depends a bit on how much you're getting out of it, So,
well, yeah, I mean, my utilization is probably not going to be as good as yours.
Yes, I would say if that's what works for you, then go for it.
Yeah, okay. So I'll maybe go to the lower end of that spectrum, be a little bit conservative, because the last thing I want is like that kind of powdery dryness that can come from big dry hops and stuff like that. Yeah. So then I guess the question is then when do I add the hops? But we should talk about the yeast first.
Yeah.
So I pitched this to you as an IPL, and that's very much what I'm trying to create. But the yeast we're actually using from WHC is
like a Trojan horse kind of thing.
Yeah, snuck an ale yeast into this. So I'm now selling this as an IPK. So it's an India Bear Kolsch.
So that'd be quite interesting. I think for those that don't have my hang-ups about purity of saying something a lager when it's a lager ale when it's an ale, I think it could be quite interesting for some people to be able to produce some clean beers without going through all the rigmarole that we force ourselves to do.
It's going to be a real adventure, this one. I have no idea how this is going to finish up, but I'm confident with your expertise that we're going to get the grist and we're going to get the hops right. And all I have to do is look after that fermentation profile and get it as clean as possible.
Yeah. So it'll be good. Regardless, it'll be good.
It'll be good. Crash cut to
Right, so anybody who's watched the Craft Beer Channel homebrew episode before will know that things don't always go to plan, and we endeavour to always show you that.
Yeah, do you remember when I did that tasting of bad macro lagers and Kronenberg came bottom because it tasted like licking a stamp? Yeah, we've got a bit of that going on. It's over bitter, and it just won't clarify, like not at all. It looks like a New England beer. And, you know, it can't be the yeast, you know? I've seen so many examples of it being nailed. Yeah, it's my fault. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's just bad, really, isn't it?